Imagine you've been waiting patiently for years. You love the traditional Latin Mass. You attend faithfully. You've raised your children in it. You've written letters, made petitions, and hoped that Pope Leo XIV might finally relax the restrictions imposed by Traditionis Custodes. And then, someone you don't control, don't influence, and don't even really know throws a hand grenade into the middle of your living room. That is exactly how Joseph Shaw, chairman of the London-based Latin Mass Society, describes the SSPX's announcement of illicit episcopal consecrations on July 1. He said it plainly on February 12th at a packed symposium in London's Oratory church founded by St. John Henry Newman himself. Shaw's words, "We've waited patiently for Pope Leo to consider relaxing Latin Mass restrictions. The SSPX has now thrown a hand grenade into this." Let that sink in. This is not an attack on the SSPX from progressive Catholics. This is from the heart of the traditional movement, from someone who has spent decades fighting for the old rite. Here is the painful dilemma. Shaw and his organization have no influence over the SSPX's reasoning or timing. Their approach is completely separate. But in the minds of bishops and cardinals who don't care about the nuances, all traditionalists risk being lumped together and tainted with disapproval. Father Dominic White, prior of Blackfriars in Oxford and a senior Dominican theologian, echoed the fear. He told OSV News, "The SSPX are not schismatics. They pray for the Pope, and we should represent their position fairly. However, they have issues with the Second Vatican Council, and there's a danger other Latin Mass supporters will be confused with them." The SSPX was founded in 1970 by Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. They reject not just the liturgical changes of Vatican II, but the Council's approaches to ecumenism and religious freedom. When they consecrate bishops without papal mandate on July 1, they are echoing 1988, when Lefebvre's 4 illicit consecrations led to excommunication by St. John Paul II. But the rest of the traditional movement? They are not the SSPX. They accept the Council. They are in full communion. They just want to worship according to the ancient rites. And here is the heartbreaking part. There was genuine hope. In October 2025, Cardinal Raymond Burke celebrated the traditional Latin Mass in St. Peter's Basilica at the altar of the chair, with explicit permission from Pope Leo XIV. Joseph Shaw called it unity with the Holy Father, so desired by Catholics attached to the ancient rite. It felt like a door was opening. Then, in January 2026, Cardinal Arthur Roche, prefect of the Dicastery for Divine Worship, presented a document to a cardinal's consistory that merely restated the official position of Traditionis Custodes. No movement, no concession, just the same walls. Shaw's fear is visceral. I'm sure the Pope can see the difference between the SSPX and other Latin Mass groups, but he may also be persuaded that the SSPX are heading into schism anyway and should now be swept out of the Church along with everyone else who likes the Latin Mass. The SSPX itself is a massive reality. According to recent statistics, they have 733 priests, 264 seminarians, and close to 800 churches and chapels worldwide. Their bishops are aging. They believe they need new bishops to survive, and they have convinced themselves that a state of emergency justifies acting without Rome. But here is the insight that cuts to the bone. Father White notes that arguments about liturgy have run through families and friendships, parishes and dioceses. The restrictions of Traditionis Custodes, he says, have discredited the synodal process initiated by Pope Francis. When ordinary Catholics feel unheard, when they see Eastern Rite Catholics and former Anglicans permitted their own rites while they face a demand for uniformity, something breaks. Shaw puts it simply, we're not looking for any kind of victory, just to be allowed to remain a tiny part of the Church, contributing in our own way. But there is another side. Father White warns that moves to weaponize liturgy have been tried before by Marxist groups in the past and now by some far-right traditionalists who view the Latin Mass as part of a whole agenda and worldview. When liturgy becomes a banner for ideology, it ceases to be prayer. Yet, White sees the fruit. He has noticed the significant influence the traditional Mass has on many young Catholics, including those training for the priesthood. He calls it clearly a place of growth in the church and warns that closing it down would be alienating and divisive. His conclusion is profound. If the church is truly universal, it should provide room for variation. So, here we are. The SSPX moves forward with July 1. Cardinal Fernandez has offered theological dialogue, but only if the consecrations are suspended. The traditional movement watches in anguish, knowing they may be collateral damage. The grenade has been thrown, the shrapnel is spreading, and ordinary Catholics who simply want to worship according to ancient rites are left wondering if they will be caught in the blast.